Welcome to week 2 of Frighttober. Today we're looking at Paranormasight, the 7 Mysteries of Honjo. Paranormasight is an incredible experience, a fresh and interesting take on the visual novel. We start the game by becoming a curse bearer, granting us the power to kill others when certain conditions are met. In our case, that condition is any time a person turns their back on us. This presents one moral quandary right away. Do we use this frightening power at all? The potential payoff for doing so is bringing someone back to life. In order to do that, we must collect soul dregs from other curse bearers, which of course means that we need to beat them to the punch, murdering them before they murder us. This brings a new level of tension to your standard visual novel dialogue. When talking to another character, we need to figure out if they're indeed one of these other curse bearers. That is, if you still have moral qualms about killing innocent bystanders at this point. But in a more cold and calculating way, you also don't want to draw attention to yourself, so it's best to leave such folks alone. If you do think the other person is a curse bearer, this ratchets up the tension to another level. Namely, you don't know the conditions they need for their curse to activate. So you'll need to pay close attention to the conversation and see if you can discern what exactly they're trying to achieve. Likewise, you need to figure out a way to convince them to turn away from you without tipping your own hand. Other games have had similarly tense adversarial dialogues here and there, but Paranormasight makes them the core of its experience, and that's wonderful. The game enhances these confrontations further with some clever solutions, fourth wall breaks, and deep branching on these narrative outcomes. It's truly a well thought out and innovative effort, and you should definitely check it out. Alright, pause it there. That's what I would say if I were only reviewing the first hour or so of Paranormasight. Yes, this game opens with a bang, but when we do take that alternate branch afterward, we don't get more of this wonderfully tense and involved gameplay. Instead, we get a conventional visual novel crime drama mystery where we're a far more passive participant in the narrative. So, since this is the first time I'm talking about a visual novel on this channel, I figure I ought to plant my flag here, or get up on my soapbox, or some third cliche. Anyhow, let's get one thing out of the way. Visual novels are video games. I am not interested in debating this point. And no, Paranormasight is not a bad game because it's ultimately a pretty standard visual novel. If you feel some strong urge to exclude visual novels from gaming, you strike me as an insufferable pedant at best and as a gatekeeping dweeb at worst. I mean, I strongly dislike Adam Sandler comedies, but I think it would be ridiculous to say that they're not films. Likewise, a pulpy romance novel is still a novel. This whole argument is ridiculous. If you don't like visual novels or dating sims or walking simulators, that's absolutely fine and valid. But they're still video games, okay? Getting back to Paranormasight, it is incredibly disappointing to go from its captivating opening to the slow realization a couple hours later that this is a much more by-the-numbers visual novel. I believe one of the most important duties of a game designer is expectations management. And here, Paranormasight is inverting the received wisdom. It's over-promising and under-delivering. It's writing checks it cannot cash. So was this just an elaborate bait and switch then? People will play your opening and then go on social media and talk about how this game is blowing their minds. And now you've got a bunch more folks playing your game, which is setting them up for disappointment because you can't deliver on those expectations. I mean, if you're only concerned with that initial splash, that's a strategy. Sure, but I can't think of anything more poisonous for a small studio looking to build a following than undermining the trust of its audience in this way. Which leads me to believe that this is not a bait and switch, or at least not a deliberate one. This is pure speculation on my part as a fellow game developer, but I think this first hour represented the game the dev team wanted to make all along. But extending these intricate and deep confrontations for an entire 10-hour playthrough was simply out of scope for production. So they kept this first hour, but went with a much more streamlined approach they knew they could deliver on. There's no reason to toss out this rather engaging opening, especially since the harsh reality for us game developers is that, as analytics show us time and again, the first hour of a game is the most crucial. If we fail to hook players in the early goings, they're probably bouncing and not coming back. I hope you can see the dilemma here. If you save this really engaging portion for later in the game, there's a good chance that most of your audience is not going to see it at all. But by front-loading this content, you are warping your players' expectations. It's a bit of a lose-lose situation for Paranormasight, so I can see why they chose the latter option. The other reason why I wouldn't call it a bait and switch is that the dev team does tie the true ending of the game back to this opening. Now, personally, this feels very contrived and a bit underdeveloped conceptually, like something cooked up late in development to resolve some dangling loose ends, but it does provide some resolution here. The distortion of expectations from its opening aside, PARANORMASIGHT does stand out as a visual novel, mostly by doing some simple things to really jazz up the format. Most striking to me was the role of the camera during the usual talking head sequences. It's very clear that the dev team knows a thing or two about shot composition and put that knowledge to use throughout this game. Frequently, the camera is placed in very interesting positions, which really helps sell the mood of certain scenes. Even in more mundane conversations, the camera pans or zooms ever so slightly to make them more visually interesting. The 360-degree inside of a sphere perspective is also an elegantly simple way of immersing the player in a drawn 2D space, and adds a new twist on searching the environment. It's also clear that while PARANORMASIGHT didn't have a huge budget for animations, the team made effective use of the various character sprites to convey emotion and dynamism. Combined with the camera flourishes, this really helps bring to life what would otherwise be drab or uninteresting scenes. Making your limitations work for you is just smart game development. If there's anything that PARANORMASIGHT is sorely lacking, it's voice acting. Even if this only had a Japanese cast with English subtitles, it would come across really well when combined with the rest of the presentation here. Barring that, something like Persona 5's little voice clips or the babble sounds featured in Undertale would really help all of this text come to life. Story-wise, PARANORMASIGHT is the kind of page-turner you'd expect from fusing shonen anime powers with a crime thriller. Personally, I think it suffers from something I call twist fatigue. This is when the plot reveals zig and zag a bit too much to the point where I don't feel invested in anything, because I know there's going to be some sort of twist that will recontextualize things later. I had the same problem with 13 Sentinels, by the way. That said, there are some nice emotional payoffs along the way, so it's not all hollow plot chicanery. Truth be told, PARANORMASIGHT is fine for what it is. It starts off like an interactive Death Note, but unfortunately that turns out to be a bit of a head fake. That's disappointing for sure. I'd really love to see a full game of those intense do I or don't I confrontational dialogues, alas. But if you want a shonen crime thriller visual novel, PARANORMASIGHT does a decent job at it. Thanks for watching. Next week on Hauntober, we're taking a look at Signalis, so be sure to subscribe and click the bell if you want to hear my thoughts on that. Catch you then.